Welcome back to Incremental. This is our practice edition where we discuss improvements made this week and tie them back to lean principles. I am Uriel Eisen.
And I am Devin Bedoni.
You got a quote?
Do or do not. There is no try. Yoda.
Our good pal Yoda. Yeah, I mean, kind of funny, but I think the point here is you have to make improvements.
Yeah.
Even if they're not perfect. I
Right.
mean, the name of this podcast is Incremental because that is kind of the approach that seems to work as people who are out there doing things instead of thinking about doing things
Yep.
tend to have done more things. So, yeah.
Thinking about doing things is all fun and well, but it doesn't get you very far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like reading all these books is very exciting, but even more exciting is seeing things happen in the shop.
Right.
Going like, oh, wow, that legitimately works and saves us time. And
Yeah. Also, these books do put me to sleep. Not that exciting.
yeah,
Very interesting. Not exciting.
they get me pretty amped up sometimes. But, anyway, yeah, I was away for 8 days, which I feel like is an improvement in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, is that an improvement? I think that's a
Lifestyle improvement, but also validation that the improvements
Yeah.
are working.
I think that's a product of your improvements.
Yeah. I was away for 8 days, and we kept shipping orders, and I walked back in, and the mill was running. So, big win.
A huge win.
Yeah, but I don't have a ton of improvements here. And we were working while I was away. We sort of lined up a big improvement, so that took most of the time, which is a conversation in and of itself. Which is like, and we've talked about this before, I don't really know how to think about those big improvements. Like there's this idea of like do an hour a day of improvements.
Yeah.
But somehow it starts to feel like, is shopping for a new machine improving the capabilities of your shop? It is kind of. On the other hand,
Yeah.
maybe it depends how you go about arriving at the decision. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's sort of like if you approach it sort of analytically and through systems thinking about where your bottlenecks are,
Right.
where your inefficiencies are for your whole system, and then you're working on addressing that,
Yeah.
then I guess it does count. If you're just, I don't know. So we built a loft, which in saying that, I don't think we approached that super analytically, but I think it was absolutely a good call. So, you know.
Yeah, I've been having a similar issue where I sort of like feel like we've stalled a little bit on improvements. But I think part of it is that we're focusing on some bigger stuff. And actually put this in a question in our notes here is like, it can be hard to distinguish whether like small improvements are worthwhile, or if you're just kind of like being like, I'm making improvements, you know?
Totally.
And so like we have this like list of stuff on our board, and I'm just finding like there's a bunch of things that none of us are really prioritizing, because I think, you know, we're kind of like, yeah, that'll be nice. Right now there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
But it can feel like we're stalled a little bit.
Yeah. I think, and we had this conversation a little bit yesterday, but I wonder about how like lean, Toyota production system, theory of constraints, all of them feel very much, I mean, they're written by and for big businesses. They are absolutely applicable to small businesses, but there is sort of a question mark in my mind around like, is this the best system for small business? And I think, so I bring that up because I think making all those small improvements does two really important things that a lot of people don't kind of discuss, which is training people to notice, and as a company emphasizing a priority on stopping your work to make those improvements.
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge mindset shift for people to say to your employees like, hey, I want you every single day in all of your work to be really noticing a ton of little issues we have.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really critical for that reason to continue with small improvements. and to continue with people generating ideas for small improvements is as a cultural tool to get everyone thinking about their work very differently. Like, you're not here to do your work. You're here to refine the system that results in the work in a funny way.
Yeah.
So I think that's key. But as a small company, it's much easier to work on, to have a good culture, I think. I mean, not to say it's no work, but
yeah, when there's 3 of you, it's a little simpler to keep it kind of the ship steered in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I do also think, like, does this math work out? If you have a huge workforce, having a lot of people doing small improvements results in a lot of improvement. And if you have a small workforce, like, kind of, I don't know, your relative gains versus the losses in production and other stuff, like, maybe I'm wrong here, but sometimes it kind of feels like maybe it's just like the workforce, like the level of strappedness in a small business often, you're pulling more resources away from critical things sometimes.
Well, that's the other thing. I think on a small team, everyone is exposed to all level of problems. Whereas if you had a big facility and one person's job is, I mean, I'm making this up, but like putting a dab of glue somewhere very particular, and that's their whole job, it would be odd to ask them to work on, like, I don't know, something much bigger, like how do we standardize our tooling, right? It's more like, hey, this is your space, make sure it's clean, make sure it's efficient, make sure it's optimized for your work. And I think maybe that's kind of part of it. And then lastly, I think as a small business that's evolving and trying to find product market fit, or trying to find a new market to serve, trying to find new customers, all with one smallish group of people who are doing a lot of different things, I think it can feel a little weird to, like, I don't know, oil the hinges on your door because they squeak. When it's like, we don't really have enough work, or I think we could have a lot more work if we went into this market. Let me sort of work on that. I don't know. Yeah,
it's like a moving target a little bit. It's kind of like oiling the hinges on your door that squeak and there's only one wall on your house. You're like, well, I can get through this wall like so smooth now, but I'm still cold. Like
optimizing. It's sort of like in last episode we talked about mechanization being the last step of SMED, because you don't want to make something efficient that might change. Or you don't want to invest a lot of money and time in making something efficient that might change. And I think maybe that's it, is like there's so much change in our businesses that it sort of applies to a lot of things. And I find myself stalling on making improvements because I'm like, okay, I can improve this oven, but soon we're going to replace the whole oven and our whole way of doing paint. So like, how much effort do I want to put in now? I don't know. And maybe I'm wrong about how I'm thinking about that. Write in, send us a message on Instagram.
Tell us
incremental CI.
Tell us we're right. Hopefully.
Or not.
Probably tell us we're wrong. Usually.
Anyway, I do have a couple improvements here, but maybe we should go through some of them.
Sure. I can jump off. So as I mentioned, we got several more of the vices that I like, the shunk ones. And we started using our new trunnions that we built. So we have one machine with the pneumatic vices on it, and then the other 2 machines have the manual vices. For the moment, of the mills. And so I made cam templates for both the manual and pneumatic vice workflows.
Very cool.
With all of the new kind of like possible origin, like work origin orientation permutations. Preset in there, so I can just kind of like pick based on, like, I know that I'm using the center of rotation to program this operation and I'm clamping in this direction, so I'm going to pick that origin, and it like aligns it itself, or it's pre-aligned basically. And then I can just name stuff and it's preloaded with stock that I just adjust the size, and
Wow.
That's been great. It's been so good.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, the programming itself, especially with some of the parts we get, is still kind of a hassle or time consuming. Hassle's not the right word. But that cuts a lot of the work out. It's one of those things where it's like, I've known for years that I need to do this.
That's awesome.
And it's still, how did I wait so long?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I remember you were working on a custom post.
Still in process.
Okay. So you don't have your rotary offsets.
Rotary fixture offsets are not in place yet. That will allow us to, I think, zero down to 4 possible offset permutations instead of right now. I think it's 8.
Gotcha.
Basically, for first op, regardless of whether it's a rotary operation or not, we'll use the top of the stock for Z and the center of the stock for X and Y. Right now, if it's a rotary operation and we're going from center line, we'll use center line for Y and Z and the center of the stock for X.
Okay.
But that requires obviously a different workflow for 3-axis versus 4-axis parts. So if we go to the rotary fixture offset system and we're always probing the top of the stock for op 1,
Gotcha.
it's always the same, regardless of how we're processing the part. Like the setup's the same.
Interesting.
So that should be cool. And we might still like drive the probe based on center line, because that's kind of a constant. We'll see.
Interesting.
Yeah, that remains to be seen.
Huh.
Can see your wheels turning.
I'm not understanding in particular. I'm not understanding why you need to probe. Why can't you always pretend to do it off of center line?
Well, I mean, we do it off of center line now, but I don't want to continue to do it off of center line because it doesn't allow you to edit and update things easily.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Or move things, I guess. Adjust things if needed.
Right.
Yeah.
So our big improvement that we've been working on is we finished out the loft. Still need to put stairs in, but it's insulated and sheetrocked, so that's sort of been this past week while I was away.
Oh, cool.
I mean, we built it the previous week.
Yeah.
So I built the last section of it. A lot more space, which is going to be really nice to increase all of our transportation times. That's been our focus. No, that's sort of, I've sort of been wondering about that compared to what it allows you to do, which is something we've both been chewing on a bit, is sort of like
space, what it allows you to do.
Bigger space is great for certain reasons, but then also it means you're likely moving further for everything, which is worse. And trying to keep everything super condensed and small should be a goal always.
Yep.
But also making it too small, you're really, I think, ending up wasting human potential is my guess.
Yeah, or compromising flow often.
Right.
So
you can't arrange things properly.
Yeah. Sometimes you're like, it's small, we're not moving far. But you're like, well, you actually just walked like 40 feet in a squiggle.
Right.
You only went 10 feet as the crow flies, but
right.
Squiggles don't help.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because if we had more square footage on one floor, we wouldn't need a loft. And then we wouldn't have to go up and down the stairs.
Yeah.
So.
It's fairly obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah. But not an option at the moment.
Not enough. Well yeah. Be. Yeah. So that was a big one. The lighting's up. We need to do a little painting, but it's pretty good. And
so this is going to be used for a second assembly station. Is that correct? Or are you moving all your assembly up there?
We're trying to figure all that out. I think the thought is to sort of have the downstairs be all machining and put another mill down there potentially, or potentially move. We will see. Or put everything. That was the original idea, is put a second mill downstairs and then move everything downstream of machining upstairs. So then it would go paint, assembly, shipping station all upstairs, And that's
a little dumb waiter or something to just take your pieces.
Yeah,
up
right now
one.
I am the dumb waiter,
Yeah.
which is pretty dumb. We definitely need to work on that because there's often situations where you realize you've left something downstairs.
Yeah.
Which is not a unique situation because of stairs, right? Anytime you're walking across and then you realize, oh, I forgot to bring X and have to walk back. So there's just some work to be done there. It would be really nice, I think, to have sort of a dumb waiter of some type where, like, I was even thinking of putting our gas out oven on a lift so that when you're downstairs, you can always access it to load it. And when you're upstairs, if you can always just bring it up to unload it. And that would sort of be the handoff. Or something where like your natural place of setting a thing down can be accessed from both upstairs and downstairs. So there aren't situations where you're like, oh, I forgot to put it onto the dumb waiter, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, some thinking around that.
Interesting. You'd need 2 gas out ovens. One that was so that one could always be down. And
Yeah.
one could always be up.
Yeah.
I've been going back to the SMED thing. And we live in a tiny house and we don't have a washing machine in our house. It's like in the shop building that's about 100 feet away or something.
Yeah.
And we have one laundry basket.
Ooh.
And I keep being like, we just need a second laundry basket. So one can be out there doing its thing.
Yeah.
The other one can be filling, and then we swap, and still haven't done it. But every day, or not every day, every time I move the laundry, I'm like, oh.
I've seen they make those like sack stands almost for like, I feel like they're used in mail and stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder if something like
wire
that,
rack that you put a bag in.
Yeah, I wonder if something like that would work so that the excess containers don't take up space when not in use or something.
Maybe.
I guess they stack.
Our laundry basket, quote unquote, is actually just like a husky bin.
Nice.
So those stack pretty well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We can make that work. It's a funny thing. We have a surface grinder. The only thing we really use it for is for grinding flats on our end mills for use in side lock holders.
Yep.
I used to buy end mills with flats ground, but I found there, for whatever reason, with the stubby side locks, like often where the flat was not where I wanted the end mill to land.
Okay.
So I've been grinding our own. It's very fast, but I've been the only one who did it. And so finally the other day, kind of followed your advice and had Ariel shadow me and take photos and notes in our SOP tab in Airtable.
Very cool.
As I was doing it. So now theoretically everyone can do it, and it's standardized based on, like, you know, how much you feed down, how many, or what your increment feeds are and how far down you go. And for this particular 3/8 that we use for all, like, pretty much every aluminum part that we make, where it lands on the shank and all that kind of stuff. And it was, it took 5 minutes. And
that's awesome.
Like, God, I need to do more of that.
Yeah. So we had a conversation a little while ago about sort of creating SOPs and creating videos.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned that the way we've been doing it is when I'm training Sam or someone else, just have them hold a video camera.
Yeah.
You did it with photos and notes instead. But I think either way, it sort of lets you, it's a pretty low effort way of doing it because you're doing the training anyway. And so it only adds a few extra minutes to the whole process.
I haven't looked into whether you can, like, natively make a video in Airtable.
Okay.
Like, its app is really good on a phone to just, like, take photos right out of the app as an attachment.
Nice.
So that's, like, very straightforward, and we use that all the time for setup photos and stuff. Actually, for setup photos, we use a webcam, but it's the same kind. It's very streamlined.
Yeah.
But I haven't been able to figure out if it'll do a video natively.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could attach it. It's just an extra step. And
yeah, I think another cool tool for this, and it is Google Slides, which I think you're not going to use because it's all in Airtable. But that's been an interesting one because it's really designed for two really cool things about it. One, it holds all sorts of different format stuff. it is optimized for big images and a small amount of text, which is really what you aim for with an SOP.
Mm-hmm.
You can add notes and stuff. So if someone needs more info, you can bury it in the notes where it's not like front and center. And you can print them and tell it how many slides you want it to print per page, which is also pretty cool if you want to have physical SOPs hanging at the stations.
Interesting.
Or you can pay for tools that do less.
Right. Yeah, we're pretty committed to Airtable at this point, so I kind of want to use as much as I can out of it.
I was more mentioning it for other folks out there.
Yeah, one cool thing that Airtable does is it has a pre-built QR code maker like widget.
Ooh, that is super nice.
For all the stuff internally.
Yeah. Interesting.
So we haven't even really started to use that yet, but that's in the back of my mind of like, if it becomes time, like it's going to be very straightforward to like QR code right to the correct SOP. And
that's awesome.
It should be pretty neat.
Yeah. And I think if you build this into your ongoing operations, not you, builds this into sort of daily operations, it's very cool when you go to onboard someone, just how much friction is reduced and how much quicker they can add value.
Mm-hmm.
When you have really clear systems, when you have SOPs and training videos that they can watch, and then maybe they're coming to you with a couple questions, but they have a pretty good basis for what it is. Or also people can have refreshers, and if you build this into your organization as a habit, you don't end up with situations where like someone's off on vacation and they're the only person who ever learned how to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And suddenly your whole business grinds to a stop.
Yeah.
So like that's on my list is one of our guys is doing payroll, and I don't actually know how to do payroll, and I'm kind of like, I should know how to do like what,
right.
Not for any reason of control, more for just like logistically, if he's on vacation and doesn't have access to the internet.
Yeah.
And people want their money.
Yep. Turns out that's the thing.
Yeah. So another improvement, we have these little toaster ovens that we use for a lot of different applications.
Like toast.
No, we use them to dry parts. We use them to gas out parts. I guess that's the only two right now.
I mean, isn't that what you use to bake your paint too?
No, for that we use a Home Depot smoker.
Ah, that's right.
That we added a blower to.
Right.
On the display, you have your time, like how long it's going to bake for, and then below it, your temperature. Right below that are two knobs. You'd expect the top knob to correspond to the top item on the screen. For whatever reason, they did not do that. And so it's so easy. Like we've been running these things for so long, but you walk up to it and it's like so easy to just grab the wrong knob. And so for a while we've been thinking about like, do we take it apart and like resolder the knobs? Yesterday I just like grabbed some e-tape and just put like color coded it. And so that was the improvement. Like
you put a color for the temp and matched the color.
And like wrapped the knob in that color tape. Yeah. So we'll see if that works. We'll see if that works. I don't like, my hope would be that it will just be like not habitual. What's the word? Like, just automatic.
Instinctual.
Where like that's the one you reach for rather than going like, oh, right. No, I need to reach for like, what's the color?
Is this a thing that you adjust often? Or is it like a timer? Like you
unfortunately, it resets to its like factory. The setting doesn't and the temperature doesn't, but the time does when it's over. So you're constantly adjusting the time. But if you grab the wrong knob, you've now adjusted the temperature instead.
Gotcha.
And then if the power goes out, which is a whole different conversation, it resets completely back to its preferred toasting settings. Yeah.
Is it European or American toast settings?
That's a good question.
Interesting. So we got our new Trunnions up and running, and first part we were trying out, got a little too aggressive and threw a part. And then we kept running, we were proofing, and something was just super weird on one of the operations, like cleaning up on one side on a indexing move and then the other side not.
Ooh,
we were looking at it. I was like thinking the programming was off somehow. And finally I was like, this has to be like a kinematic thing.
Okay.
So we got out the dial indicator and the thing had moved quite a lot.
Wow.
Like 18 thou in one direction.
The Trunnion?
The Trunnion end support. So basically the far end pivot point.
Wow.
The plate, because it's, and looking at the design, I kind of like knew this was a potential issue. It's just basically like a lap joint with 2 bolts holding it in place.
And it shifted.
So we dialed everything back in, and then in place drilled and reamed and added some dowel pins.
Gotcha.
To keep it from moving.
Yeah.
I was a little hesitant to do that right off the bat because I didn't, you got to get it right.
Yeah.
At that point. But hopefully that will hold up. Otherwise, they've been good. We've been, we haven't really been taking it easy on them at all. We're doing some pretty aggressive milling. And so far, everything seems to be working out well. So that's cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
That reminds me, I was listening to a book on the Skunk Works. It's called Skunk Works. But the guy
been curious where that name came from, by the way.
Yeah, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works.
I know, but why skunk?
Why? It was Skunk Works was some popular comic. At the time, there was some still, and the guy just like cooked all sorts of weird things in the still, and it stunk, and he called it his Skunk Works.
This was the comic?
The comic.
Okay.
And then the Skunk Works was originally in like a circus tent in a parking lot next to a plastics factory, which stunk. And so they started calling it Skunk Works, and then the guy who published the comic got mad at them, and so they changed it to Skunk Works.
That's hilarious. It's such a ubiquitous like concept at this point.
Yeah, now it's like
every single time I've heard it since I was a little kid, I've been like, why?
Is that? Yeah.
Why?
So that's the origin story. But the guy who started it, I'm forgetting his full name, but something Kelly, was famous for just having like ridiculously good intuition about all sorts of things. Like they had a list of comments he'd make, like, well, I'd guess the skin temperature at this airspeed, like the temperature of the skin of the aircraft, I would guess will be around like 650 degrees. And then they'd like do a day of calculation, guess it, like, and find it to be like 630 degrees. Like just like ridiculous stuff. But one of the comments he made was about airframe, and just he said like, I think this is going to be X PSI in the airframe. And then they calculated, and it was, he was off by like 3% or something.
Whoa.
But just thinking about structures in PSI instead of like as you move through the cross section of a structure, like what is the pressure, right? And then looking at, I think a really fun example that I've always noticed is construction equipment, like big hydraulic equipment, like cranes and stuff. And excavators, you see as the members come close to a pivot point, you have a huge reduction in area, in cross-sectional area. And so you see all these like reinforcing panels welded to the face of the plates, which is always... Anyway, so just like thinking about structures in PSI instead of...
However we
I think otherwise you sort of go like
vague,
intuitively like oh, we should probably reinforce that, not like, oh, the cross section or like the friction is not enough for I don't know. I just thought that was a clever.
It's interesting to try and again like kind of sort of taking SMED stuff, taking things away from like feel and intuition, and be like, let's maybe not do maybe do the calculations, but even if you're not doing the calculations, at least like boil down to the core principles of like what's actually happening here.
I'm started to sort of compile a bit of a design book for buckles because I'm finding I don't know, it's a weird area and there's a lot of things that I've gotten wrong and then had to correct. And so I feel like if I could eliminate getting them wrong on future buckles, that would save me time.
Yeah, definitely.
But one of them is reaction forces, primary and secondary, and maybe tertiary. That's a big one. It's like easy to be like, this is the force on it, and not like, okay, what are like some reactionary forces?
Yeah.
And in what directions are they all acting? And
yeah, it was funny when I was first doing kind of like full suspension bike design stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of bouncing ideas off a friend who was an aerospace engineer. You know, I'd be like, I think it's going to do this. And he's like, well, let's look at how it reacts. And I'd be like, oh, well, that's smart. And, yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. And that's why this works or that's why this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Occasionally, like you'll see people kind of like intuit things very incorrectly because we don't actually fully understand some of those like kinematic structures and how forces react through kinematic structures and joints and stuff, and things that seem very conceptual or very intuitive sometimes are just like way off.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're really correct.
Yeah.
And you have to boil it back down to those actual like engineering principles sometimes to get any kind of a reasonable result.
Yeah. We had an issue of a moving dropout on this bikepacking trip. And there was a tug nut on one side, on the drive side. But when you hit the brakes really hard, on the other side, you have quite a reaction force. So, of course, a tug nut doesn't really help because it's the opposite direction just because of where the caliper is relative to the axle.
It's actually not to do with that. This is one of the interesting things.
See, great. Yeah.
You're reacting a force between the ground and the axle and your mass. So where the rotor is placed doesn't really have anything to do with it.
What if you clamp down on the rotor such that the pads are your new pivot point? Because at some point, if the friction of the axle in the dropout is less than the friction of the pads on the rotor,
becomes your new pivot point. Maybe. I think it's still effectively an issue of like the forces between this is a discussion for another time probably, but the wheel is contacting the ground and trying to stop. And
so it's pulling back.
Yeah. And then the axle is trying to move with your body.
Yes.
Yeah. Are we saying
I think we're
thing?
saying yeah.
Okay,
cool. Cool. Anyway, that does it for me. We didn't have a ton of time in the shop, and
because we're stalled apparently.
Well, I was on vacation, and
you're not stalled. I'm stalled.
I'm probably stalled too. Got to get back to it. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram.
You can find me at lichen_MFG on Instagram. And
the podcast is at incremental CI, also on Instagram. And we love all the messages and the tags. Till next week.
See you soon.